So, it's officially been 1 year since the release of the Tortured Poets Department, and, what can I even say except, what a journey it's been. Looking back, we all definitely expected some heartbreaking songs, yes, but the actual subject matter of those songs hit us like a truck, in the sense that we had absolutely no idea what was actually coming our way. TTPD wasn't an album meant to be fully appreciated as soon as it dropped. It needed to simmer, it needed to cook, and honestly, in situations like that, we needed to be patient too. And look, I'm definitely not saying I hated it when it first came out or anything, but the appreciation I have for it now is genuinely miles beyond where it was exactly this time last year. We'll start first with why TTPD is probably one of the best albums Taylor Swift has ever released, and then I'll get into the reasons why I personally think that's the case. But first, we'll begin with a thematic analysis of TTPD. When it comes to thematic analysis, TTPD is, first and foremost, an album about grief. If we look at the poem Taylor included in the album booklet, you'll notice she's explicitly talking about her experiences with men or boys who were heartbreaking or, torturous, so to speak. Now, this isn't exactly new territory for Taylor, as we all know, right? But this time, it was different. This was the first time she described experiencing a very specific kind of torture, what she called going straight from the oven into the microwave, which honestly sounds like some kind of double death, emotionally speaking. This album and its themes are essentially her conversation with herself as she comes to terms with what happened, with how she can move on, and also with her deepest, darkest insecurities as a woman in her 30s who's newly single. Part of the album also deals heavily with the grief of losing a younger version of yourself, and this is happening while we, the listeners, the audience, are basically just interested in the gossip, or the tea, as we call it. And I think that dynamic, combined with the fact that a lot of fans, or at least a section of fans, thought they somehow had a say in her personal life, even though they only knew her through social media, really blurred the lines around parasocial relationships. Now, of course, these parasocial relationships have existed before in Taylor's career, but this time around, there was a new group of younger fans who probably joined the fandom around Folklore and Evermore. And so she had to navigate this whole process again of separating her personal identity from the TV or Instagram or wherever. If we look back at some of the themes she talked about on Midnights, we already know she was opening up about her insecurities and about how her fame had reached an uncontrollable level, especially with people stalking her or taking videos and photos without consent. It had become completely unmanageable, as she herself said. And to cement that fear, that insecurity, she ended up experiencing the whole cycle again when she started dating Maddie Healy. Suddenly, fans were accusing her of judging her choices in ways that honestly crossed a line. And if we look back at her past albums where she's been open and vulnerable, the last one where we saw truly raw songwriting from Taylor was probably on Red. But even if we take a closer look at Red, there were still some guards she had up, which prevented her from completely bearing herself emotionally. In TTPD, though, there was absolutely no disguise, no mask, no cover-up. And this is exactly why it feels so different from Folklore and Evermore. Don't get me wrong. Those albums were some of Taylor Swift's best written works ever, but they use stories or films or books, sometimes even as a cover for her personal experiences. And again, I'm definitely not saying it's a bad thing to draw inspiration from stories or movies, or even to pretend something is fictional when it's really personal, but it takes an entirely different level of courage to fully admit openly that, hey, this isn't fiction, this is real. This is something I've recently experienced. And that's exactly what makes TTPD so incredibly special. Just before TTPD dropped, a lot of fans had come up with this theory about the 5 stages of grief and how the album colors might represent each stage. And Taylor, being Taylor, kind of jumped onto that theory at the last minute, creating playlists on Spotify and Apple Music, categorizing her songs from previous eras according to these stages of grief. Now, TTPD definitely does explore those stages of grief. We've got songs about denial, anger, acceptance, and everything in between. But the grief isn't entirely centered around the loss of a relationship. The grief can also be about abstract concepts, stuff that's not tangible. For example, losing your youth or your sense of self over a person who never even promised you anything in the first place. It leaves you questioning whether that's your fault or theirs. Were you expecting something more from them when they never promised it? And as a 30-year-old woman myself, this hits very close to home. Because as you age, there's always this moment, this point, where you look back at your younger years and wonder why exactly you made certain choices. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about regret per se, more like a kind of evaluation. And I think that's exactly what Taylor's doing throughout this album. When she says she's giving us all her evidence, her charms, her talismans, and love poems, she absolutely means it. So, let's look at the poem In Summation by Taylor Swift. Here, she kind of explains why writing this album was so important to her. And in this poem, she's speaking directly to us, the listeners. as if we're judges or jurors. And she's the detective gathering clues based on real, lived experiences. So there she is, presenting her evidence, ready to debrief us on everything that's happened. Naturally, we'd assume that as judges or jurors, it's our job to determine guilt or innocence, or to charge someone with a crime or let them off the hook. So in that analogy, we'd assume that Taylor Swift, as the detective or investigator, is presenting her muses as the criminals she's been investigating. She talks about how she was trapped or locked inside a house for so long, which is likely referring to her long-term relationship. Though it could mean literally being trapped inside a house, I really think it's more of a metaphor for feeling trapped inside a relationship without a clear way out. And that's probably why she's pleading a case of temporary insanity. Because when you're locked up for too long, eventually, you do the craziest things imaginable just to break free. Looking back, she's calling her actions crazy, or at least something she probably shouldn't have pursued. And when I hear or read the line, "the pendulum swings," it reminds me of how every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Like, if your action was staying trapped, the reaction might be this wild jailbreak-type experience. Or if your action was doing something reckless, then the reaction could be getting caught by the public, by the media, or even getting caught up in your own delusions or someone else's lies. Now look, I know this interpretation might feel like a stretch, but honestly, that's what I love most about Tortured Poets. Even though it's not vague, even though the lyrics can be pretty specific, there's still room for so many interpretations. And ultimately, according to Taylor, that was the motive behind the murder of her muses. Since we're the judge and jury here, we need a motive, a murder weapon, and evidence. And Taylor's given us everything. The motive, of course, is what we just discussed. The murder weapon, as she puts it in the last few lines of her poem, is her veins of black ink. And the evidence? Well, that's right here, presented in the songs themselves. She was literally explaining why she briefly lost her mind, probably for the first and maybe only time in her entire life. Again, I really can't stress enough how important and rare it is for someone with her level of fame to bare herself so openly, especially under circumstances that are so gray, messy, and even sometimes embarrassing. To do that with so much talent, authenticity, and honesty is something we probably haven't seen in pop music in a very long time, if ever. In fact, the poem by Stevie Nicks is also really important to contextualize here, because I think it serves a very specific purpose, which is highlighting the similarities in the heartbreak that both Stevie and Taylor seem to have gone through. Now, if you don't know exactly what I'm talking about, Stevie herself was famously in this intense, passionate, on-and-off relationship with Lindsey Buckingham, her bandmate from Fleetwood Mac. Actually, their relationship might have been the last time we saw something this dramatically emotional unfold right in front of our eyes. Like, they'd sing to each other on stage. They literally never stopped their love gaze, and you could genuinely feel the sadness radiating from them, especially when Stevie would sing Silver Springs. There's this one line that just haunts you. You'll never get away from the sound of the woman that loves you. And honestly, I think this is exactly what she's referring to in the opening poem of TTPD, how both Taylor and Stevie are these incredibly talented songwriters who experienced these whirlwind romances practically since they were kids. And despite all that passion and intensity, their love was ultimately never fulfilled, and the pain from that would echo for years. So what do you say? Should we reopen the case files for the Tortured Poets Department? Have we learned anything in the past year, or are we still refusing to learn, even after all this time? Revisiting the Tortured Poets Department 1 year after its release honestly feels like flipping through a richly annotated scrapbook of Taylor Swift's life in 2023. When the album first dropped, what initially hit us as this overwhelming barrage of feelings and revelations has since settled into a much clearer narrative. This record is basically the sound of a woman breaking herself down and building herself back up again in real time. It's messy, it's witty, it's gut-wrenching, and it's ultimately triumphant. In just 65 minutes of music, Taylor managed to encapsulate a full emotional journey, from heartbreak to healing. Essentially, she allowed fans to accompany her through grief, rebellion, reflection, and finally, renewal. Critically and commercially, this album has carved out a significant place within Taylor's already impressive discography. Upon release, it shattered streaming records and notched yet another million-plus sales week for Taylor, which just proves that even an album born from personal chaos could extend her reign at the top of the music industry. Its longevity on the charts, 17 weeks at #1 in the US, and the multi-platinum certification really underscore that this wasn't just some gossip-fueled flash in the pan. It had serious staying power, largely due to incredibly strong songwriting that kept people coming back. Initially, though, some critics were lukewarm. They called it too long, questioned its depth, typical early reactions. But interestingly, as time passed, a lot of those assessments grew warmer. Those early polarized reviews eventually coalesced into genuine respect for the boldness of this project. After all, it's not every day you see a megastar dropping a double album full of diary-like confessions at the absolute height of her tour. Taylor took a huge risk by exposing her raw, unpolished feelings, and honestly, it paid off beautifully in authenticity. The album's title itself has also proven incredibly fitting. The Tortured Poets Department implies the space where pain is studied, cataloged, and maybe even artfully cultivated. And indeed, Taylor basically set up shop in her own Tortured Poets Department for this record, becoming both the subject and the scholar of heartbreak. We see her deeply examining her own psyche, sometimes with humor, laughing at the absurd drama she got caught up in, sometimes with sharp self-criticism, and sometimes with profound empathy toward her own suffering. And by doing this, she's inviting us, the listeners, to examine our own heartbreaks and questionable choices with that same mixture of seriousness and humor. Many fans have said that listening to this album felt genuinely cathartic. There's this sense of solidarity in hearing someone as successful and seemingly put together as Taylor Swift admitting that she can still get her heart stomped on, still make silly decisions for love, still feel insecure about being replaced, and yet still emerge, okay, on the other side. It's a powerful reminder that no one is immune to heartbreak, but also that no heartbreak is ever insurmountable. But still, I want to insist that this album is not just about a breakup. I really mean that. Because honestly, the moment the album changed for me, the exact moment my entire perspective shifted, was when I finally heard and fully understood Taylor's most introspective songs, like Albatross, How Did It End, and specifically, The Prophecy. In fact, The Prophecy could have technically served as the opening track for the Tortured Poets Department because it really underlines what seems to be the driving force in Taylor Swift's life, which is love. Full stop. I genuinely believe she's one of those people who just loves love, who loves to experience those goosebumps, that early honeymoon period, but also the long-term stability that comes afterward. Now, of course, we don't know exactly how each relationship has played out behind closed doors, but we do know that society as a whole just can't seem to accept why a woman would ever say no, or have issues with a heterosexual, rich, white man. It somehow seems impossible to people that women can still find faults in men who tick all of those societal boxes I just mentioned. So, yes, men and women alike have been confused about why Taylor Swift still says that's not enough, or why she ends up breaking up with these men. And that's exactly why it's easier, or honestly lazier, to call her names like a curse, or the bolter, or in the worst scenarios, even a slut. So in a way, this album is also an unraveling of patriarchy and all the outdated values it represents as Taylor stands on her own 2 feet and asks herself, why should I keep going through this again and again? And we get the answer to that exact question in The Prophecy. Her entire life, Taylor has been writing about love and all the different forms it can take. And she's explicitly able to do that, as she herself said, because she writes best about men who are, frankly, the worst. But if this is true, then logically, we have to assume that she needs to keep meeting these bad men for her songwriting to remain some of the best in her generation. This, of course, presents a huge problem because Taylor Swift, the actual person, still needs love. I'd argue that everyone needs love, but Taylor specifically seems so deeply into this particular kind of experience, almost as if love itself is a drug for her. So she keeps chasing it, almost completely naive about her past experiences, as if none of those heartbreaks ever happened. Each time she thinks, this time it'll work out, only to come back later and tell us, her audience, exactly what went wrong once again. And honestly, I'm sure that is an incredibly exhausting experience. So here she is, essentially telling whatever god or supreme being might be out there in the universe that this prophecy absolutely has to change. The fact that she's one of the greatest songwriters alive, that she's gained fame, popularity, money, and every material thing you could ask for, doesn't mean she should be deprived of the one thing she truly needs. And if the deal is that she has to reverse all of this, spend all of her money, or waste all of her time, resources, and talent, she's openly willing to do that, as long as it means she'll finally be with someone who genuinely enjoys spending time with her. Now, this song feels incredibly relatable because even if you strip away Taylor's fame and popularity, it's still something a lot of women go through as they age. You're fully aware that your biological clock is ticking, you know you're getting older, your parents and family members are getting older too, and at some point, you begin to wonder if maybe you're the problem, if maybe you're the reason you're stuck without someone by your side. And in those vulnerable moments, you might choose people who probably aren't the best for you, simply because you're chasing security or the idea of family. But as we've seen time and again, it never really works out if your heart isn't truly in it. So what exactly should Taylor do? If she has to keep writing songs about love and all these varied experiences associated with it, isn't going through transitory, unstable experiences almost inevitable for that kind of life? But here she is, saying clearly that she's done. She's written and sung an entire lifetime's worth of breakup songs, and now she wants something real. Personally, and I genuinely mean this, I hope she finds that. Again, this kind of vulnerable songwriting is something I've never really seen before from Taylor Swift. Interestingly enough, Halsey recently released an album called The Great Impersonator, which touches on some similar topics, and honestly, maybe someday soon I'll talk about the similarities between TTPD and The Great Impersonator, because it's fascinating to me how two of Maddie Healy's exes seem to be asking similar questions or going through similarly isolating experiences when it comes to love. You really have to wonder if there's some kind of trauma response or post-traumatic stress situation involved here. But anyway, that's definitely a topic for another day. Another aspect of the album's legacy is how it somewhat redefined Taylor's public narrative. If we think back to 2022 and early 2023, the focus was very much on her past. Basically, it told the industry and her audience alike that Taylor Swift can honor her past by re-recording it, while also pushing forward with original work that stands completely on its own. Throughout late 2024 and into 2025, think pieces and fan discussions frequently circled back to the Tortured Poets department whenever new developments popped up. By mid-2023, even as Taylor's personal life was swinging between heartbreak and new romance, one thing stayed constant: the global spotlight following her every move. She was right in the middle of her record-shattering Eras tour when all these love life upheavals were happening. Imagine performing night after night to tens of thousands of people smiling and singing about love, while privately nursing a broken heart or secretly seeing a controversial new partner. This tension between public poise and private turmoil really seeps into the Tortured Poets department. It's expressed in a series of songs that tackle fame's pressure, the fragmentation of identity, and the refuge that artifice sometimes provides. Now, Taylor has explored fame before. Think about songs like The Lucky One, Mirror Ball, or Nothing New. But here, her commentary is darker, more literary, and intimately tied to specific events she was going through. One striking motif of the album's aesthetic is its dark academia vibe, that intellectual, moody style that evokes old libraries, classic literature, and scholarly gloom. And this aesthetic choice fits perfectly with how Taylor approached writing these songs, like a poet scribbling furiously in a leather notebook at midnight, processing life through metaphor and literary references. We see this clearly in the album's title itself, in the mentions of typewriters, Dylan Thomas, and especially in a track like Clara Bow, which directly references the iconic 1920s film star. Through this lens, Taylor grapples openly with her place as an artist and as a woman who's constantly being watched by the entire world. One of the key songs exploring this idea is Who's Afraid of Little Old Me? Right away, the title is a playful twist on Edward Albee's famous play, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? And immediately sets this meta-theatrical tone. In this song, Taylor seems to ask, why exactly am I seen as this intimidating figure? Why are people, exes, the media, maybe even other artists, so afraid of what little old me might do or say? Part of it might reference how any man who dates her knows there's a solid chance he'll end up in a song someday, which, let's face it, would scare off a few people. It might also address how the media sometimes villainizes her or portrays her as calculated and powerful in an almost threatening way. Clara Bow, in particular, is an absolute jewel of layered meaning. Named after the original Hollywood it girl of the 1920s, the song draws a clear parallel between Taylor and Clara Bow, and more broadly, between female stars across different eras. Taylor uses Clara's story almost like a mirror for her own feelings about being today's it girl, fully aware that one day someone else will inevitably take that spot. Now, this is a theme she touched on before, like in Nothing New from the Red Vault, about the anxiety of being replaced by the next shiny thing, or in The Lucky One from Red, about a star who leaves fame behind just to preserve herself. By referencing a silent film star and then referencing herself, she's drawing this clear line through history, openly acknowledging that the it girl phenomenon is eternal, and that she's simply one in a very long line. As we wrap up this one-year anniversary retrospective, it's pretty clear that the Tortured Poets department has secured a genuinely unique spot in Taylor Swift's body of work. It might not have the polished but vague concept of 1989 or the indie mystique of folklore, but it offers something perhaps even more valuable: raw honesty and a narrative cohesion that genuinely emerged from real-life chaos. And looking back now, we can clearly see exactly what she meant. The emotional wounds inflicted by Joe and Maddie, and even those wounds Taylor admits she inflicted upon herself by staying too long or diving headfirst into fire, are all laid bare here. But we also get to witness the healing, how she cauterizes those wounds through music, and eventually through new, healthier love. In the final scene of this album's story, we find Taylor not as a tortured poet anymore, but as the alchemist of her own experiences, someone who took all that darkness and pain and transmuted it into art, growth, and resilience. 1 year later, we can really appreciate how the Tortured Poets department wasn't just some outpouring of journal entries. It was a carefully constructed journey that had to be lived first in order to be truly understood. Of course, the album's legacy is still unfolding even now. Fans continue to decode small details, and honestly, who knows what we might uncover by the second anniversary. As we close this retrospective, it's worth reflecting on just how far Taylor has come since writing these songs. The chapter of the tortured poet is, as she put it herself, closed and boarded up, a distinct period of her life preserved in these tracks, kind of like pressed flowers meant to be examined and learned from but not relived. In its place, she's built something new, presumably happier, healthier, and more stable. And thanks to the Tortured Poets Department, we got to be part of that evolution. We got to witness one of the world's biggest pop stars at her most vulnerable, and ultimately, at her most victorious. 1 year later, this album stands as a testament to the sheer alchemy of songwriting, how Taylor Swift can take the leaden weight of heartbreak, infuse it with melody, wit, and emotional depth, and spin it into gold. Gold that glitters in our ears, and perhaps more importantly, in our hearts, long after the storm has passed. So, that's my video celebrating the first anniversary of TTPD. Let me know how you guys liked it, and comment down below if I missed anything. As usual, if you liked this video and my analysis, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We have a lot more theories coming up. Until then, ciao.